Hello, I'm Claire L. Fishback, author of supernatural suspense and horror. Today I'm going to share with you a couple of stories from my latest release, The Doll Room and Other Stories. This book was a somewhat feat of miracles. I wrote about 95% of the stories while recovering from a concussion in early 2020. The other 5 to 10% I wrote a couple years ago. So I'm going to share with you first the title story called The Doll Room. Let's begin. My grandma had a huge doll collection, dolls of various sizes, ages, and materials, porcelain, cloth, plastic. She even had a few vintage Barbie dolls on stands with their cat-eye makeup and coiffed hair, a collection of Kewpie dolls grinning from one corner of the room, and an array of Cabbage Patch dolls old enough to have yarn hair from another. The dolls wore a broad array of clothing, too, Victorian dresses, modern skirts and blouses, nighties, clothing for every era or occasion. They were all arranged on shelves in one room of her expansive house where she and my grandpa raised my mom and my 4 uncles. My uncles had no interest in the doll room. Living on the acreage they did, the boys were always outside playing in the woods. Since my mom was 4, she always wanted to play with her older brothers. They always said no, so she stopped asking and found interest in the dolls. She wanted to play with them, but Grandma wouldn't let her. And you know how that goes for kids, and most adults really. Say, no you can't, and the thing the kid can't do instantly becomes the most coveted and desirable. There was one doll in particular. It was a baby with an oversized head. A bonnet covered its porcelain skull. The baby had big blue eyes that remained open in a fixed stare. It wasn't like a usual baby doll. Instead of a soft body with plastic appendages attached, a cold, hard material made up her body, ceramic or porcelain. The baby wore a nightgown closed at the neck with 2 snaps. The sleeves were short and puffed at the shoulders. She didn't have hair, but there was the suggestion of hair, like a Kewpie doll. Light brown paint, airbrushed on, peeked out from under the edge of the bonnet's lace and curled down onto her forehead. She had big cheeks and a little pink mouth. I think she was supposed to look like a real baby, but the material forming her head and body was too rigid to provide the necessary details, like a nose with nostrils. Her nose was a bump in the middle of her face. The bonnet hid most of her head. I didn't know if she had ears, and by the time I saw what was under that bonnet, I was too horrified to pay attention to whether or not she did. It happened a few years ago, and to this day I can't stand the sight of dolls. Heaven forbid I should have any daughters of my own. It was midsummer. Grandma had passed away. She had been sick for a while, so it wasn't a surprise or anything. My mom asked me to help her out at the house. Her plan was to clean it up, clean it out, and move in, even though it was far too big for a single person. I've always been close to my mom. I know the real reason she wanted me there was for support, because of the doll room. Mom told me about the times she tried to play with the dolls, and the one time Grandma caught her with a baby, about to take her bonnet off. Grandma had rushed in and removed the baby from Mom's hands with slow movements reserved for catching small animals. "What have I told you about being in this room?" Grandma asked, with the baby safely in her arms. Mom said she had fire in her eyes that did not match her gentle tone. "What have I told you?" Mom said the low calmness of her words, coupled with the look in her eyes, made Grandma that much scarier. Mom backed out of the room, and as she went, she heard Grandma mutter, "Never take the bonnet off, never take it off." She hummed an unfamiliar lullaby and settled the doll back in her bassinet. When Mom was 10, she developed an aversion to that room. She told me what had happened on the 4th day in that house. We made excellent progress in the other bedrooms leading up to that day. I could tell Mom was avoiding the doll room at all costs. She kept her eyes averted whenever she walked past with another bag full of donations or trash. Mom came back to her brother Bobby's room, not sure why they couldn't help clean out their crap. And I asked her, "Mom, why do you avoid the doll room?" "What? Avoid?" She laughed. "I don't avoid it." She brushed my question off with a wave of her hand. Every time you walk past it, you look down at the floor or at the blank wall across from the doorway. I felt a little bad calling her out like that. Her lips pulled into a tight line and she touched my arm. Let's go outside for some air. We went out onto the wide front porch and sat on the bottom step. Remember how I told you the story about the baby in there? Mom asked. Yeah, Grandma told you never to take her bonnet off, I said. Mom shook her head and let out a long sigh. She didn't tell me that, not directly anyway. Mom looked out over the circular driveway to a stand of aspens clustered at the center. Tears filled her eyes. I took her bonnet off. She blinked and a tear fell. Grandma caught me with the doll after I already put it back on. I'm sorry I didn't tell you the truth before. What was under it? I asked. There had to be a reason she couldn't take it off, right? Mom shook her head. That doesn't matter. But after I took it off, from that day on, I can hear, the baby crying, even now. She whispered the last two words. Tears slid down both cheeks. She stared forward, still for a few seconds before visibly shaking herself and smiling at me. She didn't wipe away the tears, almost like she didn't realize they were there. Why don't you go finish up in Uncle Bobby's room for me? She asked. I'll be up in a sec. She brushed her hand down my arm and squeezed my hand. I nodded. Okay, sure. Back upstairs, I paused in the doorway to the doll room and surveyed the shelves and floor where dolls stood, packed shoulder to shoulder. I half expected them to all turn their heads at the same time and look at me. In the center of the back wall was the white bassinet, grayed with age and dust. I crept forward as if there was a live baby in there I didn't want to awaken, and peered down into the lacy bunting. Her glossy face peered up at me. I reached down and pulled the silk ribbon at her throat. The lace around her face loosened. I slid the bonnet off over her forehead and down the crown of her head. Mom's story had me freaked a little. Instead of just rolling her over face down on the tiny mattress in light pink blankets, I lifted her. Her body was hard and cold. I turned her over when my mom gasped behind me. I dropped the baby as I whirled around, eyes wide. My mom's eyes seemed to watch the baby fall. She reached out a hand, then snatched it back to cover her face when the porcelain hit the floor and shattered. I closed my eyes. A musty smell rose from the floor. Don't look, she said in a horrified and shrieky voice. Don't look! I had to look. A strange wheezing sound came from my mom, but I had to look. Among the shards of broken porcelain and dust was a shriveled brown form with an oversized head. It curled in on itself, tiny limbs held tight against its malformed body. I backed away and hit a shelf with my shoulder. A few dolls tumbled down around me. I screamed and ran to my mom, leaping over the busted figure. She held on to me, then hauled me down the hallway by the hand, gasping and spluttering. At the bottom of the porch steps, she kept going until we reached her car. We got inside. What the hell was that? I asked. Mom looked up at the window to the doll room, through the windshield, and back at me. My sister, she said with a sob. It's my sister! That was when the crying started. I hope you enjoyed that story. There are many more where that came from if you buy the copy of The Doll Room. It's available from all retailers, online retailers, as well as my other short story collection, Lump, and my novel, which was a finalist for the Colorado Book Award. See if you can see that sticker. The Blood of Seven. The sequel to The Blood of Seven will be coming out this year, late 2021. As a reminder, I'm Claire L. Fishback. This has been a great pleasure spending this time with you, telling you one of my fabulous stories. At least I think it's fabulous. Thank you for tuning in, and until next time, you can read more about me and my books and what inspired them and everything if you scroll down to the blog post below. All right, thanks guys. Have a good day.